Hello and welcome to History in Twilight. Imagine standing before a temple older than writing, older than the wheel, older than agriculture itself. A place where massive stone pillars carved with mysterious animals rise from the earth like silent witnesses to a forgotten world. This temple was not built by pharaohs or emperors. It was built by hunter-gatherers, people who supposedly lived in crude shelters and followed herds across empty plains. Yet somehow, 11,600 years ago, they created something that would make even the pyramids seem young. Before we begin this journey into the deepest shadows of human history, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's a wonderful way to support our work, and it means the world to me. I'm also always curious to know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Please share that in the comments below. And now, settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade away. Tonight, we travel to a windswept plateau in southern Turkey, to a place called Göbekli Tepe, the belly-shaped hill. Here, beneath layers of earth and time, lies a secret that has shattered everything we thought we knew about our ancestors. This is the story of the world's first temple, and the mystery of why it was built 6,000 years before Stonehenge, by people who weren't supposed to have the knowledge, the organization, or the reason to create such a thing. This is a story that begins not with kings or cities, but with a single man standing on a hill, holding a piece of carved stone, and realizing that human history had just been rewritten. Chapter 1. The Discovery. The day history changed. The year was 1994. The place was a remote corner of southeastern Turkey, near the city of Şanlıurfa, where the Anatolian plateau stretches endlessly under a burning sun. The landscape here is harsh and unforgiving, a realm of dry winds, scattered shrubs, and limestone ridges that crumble beneath your boots. For centuries, local shepherds had grazed their flocks across these hills, noticing little beyond the rocky soil and the occasional fragment of ancient stone. To them, the hill known as Göbekli Tepe, which means belly-shaped hill or potbelly hill in Turkish, was just another unremarkable rise in an ocean of unremarkable terrain. But on that hill, something extraordinary was waiting. Klaus Schmidt, a German archaeologist with a reputation for chasing impossible dreams, arrived at Göbekli Tepe in the autumn of that year. He had been working in the region for some time, studying the origins of early human settlement. He had heard rumors, whispers really, that this particular hill was different. American surveyors, in the 1960s, had briefly noted the site, observing scattered flint tools and unusual stone fragments. They had dismissed it as little more than an abandoned medieval cemetery. The hill was catalogued, filed away, and forgotten. But Schmidt saw something they had missed. As he climbed the slope, his boots crunching over the dry earth, he began to notice the stones. Not natural boulders scattered by geology, but shaped limestone blocks, some of them massive, half buried in the soil, like the bones of a sleeping giant. The surface of the hill was littered with flint tools, thousands upon thousands of them, glinting in the afternoon light. These were not the crude scrapers of wandering nomads. They were finely crafted blades, the kind used by skilled hands for precise work. And then he saw the pillars. They jutted from the earth at odd angles, T-shaped monoliths of carved limestone, their surfaces weathered but unmistakable. Schmidt knelt beside one, brushing away the dust with trembling fingers. Carved into the stone were intricate reliefs, the shape of a fox, the curve of a serpent, the outstretched wings of a bird. These were not random marks. They were deliberate, artistic, and ancient beyond reckoning. Schmidt stood, his heart pounding, and looked out across the hill. Beneath his feet, he knew, lay something far greater than a cemetery or a forgotten village. This was not a natural hill. It was a tell, an artificial mound created by centuries, perhaps millennia, of human construction and collapse. Every instinct, every year of training, told him the same impossible truth. This was a temple. The magnitude of that realization took his breath away. Temples required civilization. They required agriculture, settled communities, social hierarchies, and complex religious belief. But the tools scattered around him, the flint blades and stone hammers, belonged to the Neolithic period, the New Stone Age, a time when humans were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers, moving from place to place in search of food, with no permanent homes and no reason to build monuments. Yet here it was. Over the following weeks, Schmidt began a preliminary excavation, carefully peeling back the layers of time. What he found defied every expectation. The stone pillars were not random. They formed circles, great rings of standing stones arranged with geometric precision. Some of the pillars were taller than a man, weighing as much as 10 tons. They had been quarried from the bedrock nearby, shaped with stone tools, and somehow transported across the hillside and erected in perfect alignment. And there were not just one or two circles. Ground-penetrating radar would later reveal the staggering truth. There were at least 20 such structures buried beneath the hill, most of them still untouched, waiting in the darkness. News of the discovery spread quickly through the archaeological community. Skeptics dismissed it at first. The idea of a monumental temple complex built by pre-agricultural hunter-gatherers seemed absurd, a fantasy born from misinterpretation. But as Schmidt continued his work, the evidence became undeniable. Carbon dating of organic material found within the structures returned dates that sent shockwaves through the academic world. Göbekli Tepe was not a few thousand years old. It was not even 5,000 years old. It was 11,600 years old. Klaus Schmidt would spend the rest of his life excavating Göbekli Tepe, painstakingly uncovering its secrets one stone at a time. He worked through scorching summers and freezing winters, driven by a certainty that bordered on obsession. This is the most important archaeological site in the world, he told anyone who would listen. And slowly, reluctantly, the world began to believe him. But even as the site revealed its age and its majesty, it guarded its greatest secrets jealously. Who built this place? Why did they build it? And perhaps most mysteriously of all, why did they bury it? The answers to those questions would challenge everything humanity thought it knew about its own past. The hill with the belly-shaped name had given birth to a revolution, one that would echo through the halls of universities, rewrite textbooks, and force us to ask a question we thought we had already answered. When did civilization truly begin? Chapter 2. The Impossible Date, a Timeline Shattered. When the first carbon dating results came back from the laboratories, Klaus Schmidt sat in silence, staring at the numbers on the page. He checked them again. He had them verified by a second lab, and then a third. The results were consistent, undeniable, and utterly staggering. Göbekli Tepe was built around 9600 BCE, approximately 11,600 years ago. To understand the weight of that date, we must step back and place it within the story of human history. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists and historians operated under a clear and comfortable timeline. Civilization, they believed, began in Mesopotamia around 5,000 years ago, in the fertile valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. There, the Sumerians built the first cities, invented writing, and created the institutions that would define human society: kings, priests, laws, and taxes. Before that, there was the Neolithic Revolution, the moment around 10,000 years ago when humans transitioned from hunting and gathering to farming. Agriculture, the story went, was the key. It allowed humans to settle in one place, to accumulate surplus food, to specialize in crafts and trades. From agriculture came villages. From villages came towns. From towns came cities. And from cities came temples, built by organized, hierarchical societies to honor their gods. This was the accepted sequence. It was logical, linear, and supported by decades of evidence from sites across the Middle East. Stonehenge, the famous stone circle in England, was built around 3000 BCE, roughly 5,000 years ago. The Great Pyramid of Giza, one of the wonders of the ancient world, was completed around 2500 BCE, 4,500 years ago. Göbekli Tepe predates them all by millennia. It is older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It is older than the pyramids by 7,000 years. It is older than pottery, older than metalworking, older than the wheel, and older than writing. When Göbekli Tepe was built, woolly mammoths still walked the earth. The last ice age was barely over, and much of Europe was still covered in glaciers. The date was so old, so impossibly ancient, that it broke the timeline. According to everything archaeologists thought they knew, the people who built Göbekli Tepe should not have been capable of such a feat. In 9600 BCE, humans in this region were hunter-gatherers. They lived in small, mobile bands, following herds of wild animals and foraging for plants. They had no permanent settlements, no domesticated crops, no livestock. They slept in temporary shelters made of hides and branches and moved with the seasons. These were not supposed to be the kind of people who built temples. Temples required manpower, organization, and surplus resources. You needed farmers to grow food, laborers to quarry and transport stone, artisans to carve the pillars, and some form of leadership to coordinate the effort. You needed a reason to stay in one place long enough to complete such a project. Everything about the existence of Göbekli Tepe contradicted the established narrative. And yet, there it was. The evidence was not just in the date. It was in the sheer scale and sophistication of the construction. The stone pillars of Göbekli Tepe are massive. The largest discovered so far weighs approximately 16 tons and stands over 18 feet tall. These were not rough-hewn boulders. They were carefully shaped into T-forms, with flat tops and straight sides, using nothing but stone tools. No metal chisels, no iron hammers, just flint and determination. To create a single pillar, workers would have had to identify a suitable section of bedrock, cut it free from the surrounding stone, smooth its surfaces, and carve intricate reliefs into it. Then, they would have had to move it, somehow, from the quarry to the construction site. Without wheels, without draft animals, without ropes made from anything stronger than plant fibers, it would have taken dozens of men, working in coordination, to drag or roll each pillar across the uneven ground. Then they would have had to lift it upright, balance it perfectly, and anchor it in place with smaller stones packed tightly around its base. And they did this not once, but dozens of times, creating multiple circular enclosures, each one a feat of engineering and artistry. The effort required was staggering. Estimates suggest that building just one of the circular structures would have required several hundred people working continuously for months, perhaps years. And there are at least 20 of these circles buried at Göbekli Tepe, arranged in layers, one on top of another, built and then deliberately filled in over a span of more than 2,000 years. Who organized this? Who fed the workers? Who planned the construction? And who decided what symbols to carve into the stone? The sheer impossibility of Göbekli Tepe forced archaeologists to confront an uncomfortable question. Had they gotten the story of civilization backwards? For decades, the accepted model was that human society developed in stages. First came survival, the struggle to find food and shelter. Then came agriculture, which provided stability. Then came villages, which allowed for trade and specialization. Then came religion, which arose to explain the mysteries of life and justify the power of elites. Göbekli Tepe suggested a different story. It suggested that religion came first. Perhaps it was not agriculture that gave birth to civilization. Perhaps it was faith. Perhaps the need to gather, to worship, to build something greater than themselves, was what first brought humans together in large numbers. Perhaps the act of constructing a temple forced them to cooperate, to innovate, to settle in one place long enough to see the project through. And perhaps, in the process of feeding the workers who built the temple, humans learned to cultivate wild grains and domesticate animals. In other words, the temple did not come after civilization. The temple created civilization. This was not just a new theory, it was a revolution. And it all began with a date, an impossible number that refused to fit into the old timeline. 11,600 years ago, on a windswept hill in Anatolia, someone decided to carve massive stones, raise them to the sky, and create something sacred. The world had not seen its like before, and, in a very real sense, it would change the world forever. Chapter 3. The Builders, the Hunters Who Dreamed in Stone. Who were they? That is the question that haunts every scholar who studies Göbekli Tepe. Who were the people who conceived of this place, who quarried the stone, who carved the pillars, and who gathered here beneath the stars 11,600 years ago? We do not know their names. We do not know their language. We will never hear their voices or read their words. But we can see what they left behind, and from those silent stones we can begin to piece together a portrait of a people who were far more sophisticated than we ever imagined. They were hunter-gatherers. That much is certain. The archaeological evidence is clear and consistent. When Göbekli Tepe was being built, there was no agriculture in this region. No domesticated wheat or barley grew in the surrounding fields. No sheep or goats grazed in pens. The bones found at the site, thousands upon thousands of them, tell the story. They are the bones of wild animals: gazelles, wild asses, aurochs, red deer, wild boar, and birds. These were not herded, they were hunted. The people who came to Göbekli Tepe were nomads, moving with the seasons, following the migrations of game, harvesting wild grains and nuts when they ripened. Their world was one of constant movement, of reading the land and the sky, of knowing where the herds would be and when the rains would come. They lived lightly on the earth, leaving few traces, carrying their lives on their backs. And yet, they built a temple that would last for millennia. This is the paradox at the heart of Göbekli Tepe. How do you convince people who have no reason to stay in one place to commit to a construction project that would take generations? The answer must lie in something more powerful than hunger or comfort. It must lie in belief. Imagine the conversations that must have taken place. Picture a gathering of elders from different bands, meeting perhaps at the change of seasons, at a place that had long been considered sacred. Perhaps there was a natural spring nearby, or a particular hill where the ancestors were said to walk. Someone, a visionary or a shaman, proposes an idea that must have seemed mad: to create a permanent place of worship, to carve stones that would reach toward the heavens, to make something that would outlast them all. Why would anyone agree to this? The only answer is that they believed it mattered. They believed that the gods, or the spirits, or the forces that governed their world required it. They believed that by building this place, they could ensure good hunts, fertile lands, protection from enemies, or passage to the afterlife. Whatever the specific belief, it was powerful enough to overcome every practical objection, and so they came, not just once, but year after year, generation after generation. The scale of the labor tells us that this was not the work of a single tribe. Estimates suggest that constructing even one of the stone circles would have required several hundred people working together. Not just the strong young men who could move the stones, but also the women and children who prepared food, the elders who directed the work, the craftsmen who shaped the pillars, and the artists who carved them. Feeding such a workforce would have been an immense challenge. Hunter-gatherer societies typically operate in small bands of 20 to 50 people, because larger groups would quickly exhaust the local food supply. But at Göbekli Tepe, hundreds of people would have needed to be fed for months, perhaps years at a time. The answer may lie in the bones. The sheer quantity of animal remains found at the site is staggering. These were not the remnants of everyday meals. They were the debris of feasts, of ritual gatherings where entire herds were slaughtered and consumed. The pattern suggests that Göbekli Tepe was not a place where people lived permanently. It was a destination, a pilgrimage site, where different groups would gather periodically for ceremonies and celebrations. Perhaps different bands took turns hosting the gatherings, each one responsible for bringing game and providing labor for a season. Perhaps the work itself was a form of worship, a way of honoring the sacred through sweat and stone. Perhaps the young men who carved the pillars were proving themselves, earning status and respect through their skill and dedication. What is clear is that these people possessed qualities we do not usually associate with prehistoric hunter-gatherers. They had sophisticated social organization. They could plan ahead, coordinate large groups, and maintain a collective vision across generations. They had specialized skills. Some were quarrymen, some were sculptors, some were architects who understood weight and balance well enough to raise multi-ton pillars without them toppling. They also had art. The carvings at Göbekli Tepe are not crude or primitive. They are detailed, expressive, and deeply symbolic. The sculptors understood anatomy, movement, and perspective. They could transform a flat stone surface into a three-dimensional representation of a leaping fox or a coiled serpent. This was not the work of people barely surviving. This was the work of people who had the time, the skill, and the cultural sophistication to create beauty. And they had no permanent homes. This is perhaps the most astonishing fact of all. Despite decades of excavation, archaeologists have found no evidence of domestic structures at or near Göbekli Tepe. No houses, no storage buildings, no garbage pits filled with the debris of daily life. There are only the temples, the stone circles, and the bones of feasts. The people who built Göbekli Tepe came, they worked, they worshipped, they feasted, and then they left. They returned to their nomadic lives, following the herds across the plains, living in temporary camps. But they carried with them the memory of the stones, the knowledge of what they had created together, and the belief that it was sacred. Who were they? They were us, human in every way that matters. They felt awe and wonder. They asked questions about the nature of existence. They created art and told stories. They gathered in community and found meaning in shared purpose. They looked up at the night sky and felt the pull of something greater than themselves. They were the hunters who dreamed in stone. And in dreaming, they changed the world. Chapter 4. The Stone Circles. Cathedrals of the Neolithic. Stand at the center of Göbekli Tepe, in one of the excavated circles, and look up. Above you, the sky stretches endless and blue, the same sky that arched over this place 11,000 years ago. Around you, rising from the earth like ancient guardians, are the pillars. They are T-shaped, massive, and silent, their surfaces carved with symbols whose meanings have been lost to time. This is what remains. But imagine what it was when it was whole. The stone circles of Göbekli Tepe are not random clusters of megaliths. They are carefully designed architectural spaces, each one a distinct enclosure built with intention and precision. So far, archaeologists have identified and partially excavated 4 main circles, labeled simply as enclosures A, B, C, and D. But ground-penetrating radar has revealed at least 16 more buried beneath the hill, and possibly as many as 20 in total, making Göbekli Tepe not just a temple, but a complex of temples built and rebuilt over the course of more than 2,000 years. Each enclosure follows a similar pattern. At the center stand 2 massive pillars, taller and more elaborately carved than the others. These are the focal points, the sacred twins, positioned to face each other across an oval or circular space. Around them, arranged in a ring, are smaller pillars, still enormous by any standard, each weighing several tons. Between the pillars, low stone walls were built, creating a defined boundary between the sacred interior and the world beyond. The largest pillars discovered so far stand over 18 feet tall and weigh as much as 16 tons. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the weight of 3 African elephants, or 2 full-grown orcas, and these were shaped, transported, and erected by people using nothing but stone tools, wooden levers, and human muscle. How did they do it? The quarry is nearby, just a short distance from the main site. Here, the bedrock of limestone lies exposed, and you can still see the traces of where pillars were cut free. The process would have been painstaking. Workers would have used harder stones, likely flint or basalt, to pound channels into the limestone, slowly cutting around the shape of the desired pillar. It might have taken weeks to free a single stone from the living rock. Once freed, the pillar had to be moved. Without wheels, the only option was dragging or rolling. Teams of men, perhaps hundreds of them, would have used ropes made from plant fibers, wooden rollers cut from logs, and pure determination. The ground between the quarry and the temple is uneven, studded with rocks and crossed by gullies. Every foot of progress would have been earned through sweat and coordination. And then came the moment of raising. Picture it. The pillar lying on its side at the edge of the circle. A pit already dug to receive its base. Ropes are attached. Men position themselves on all sides. Wooden levers are wedged beneath the stone. Someone, a leader or a priest, gives a signal. Together, they pull. The pillar shifts, tilts, begins to rise. Slowly, agonizingly, it is hauled upright. For a moment it teeters, balanced on the edge of disaster, and then it settles into the pit with a deep thud that shakes the ground. Smaller stones are quickly packed around its base, locking it in place. The pillar stands, and the crowd, exhausted and exhilarated, knows they have done something impossible. But the pillars themselves are only part of the story. What makes Göbekli Tepe truly extraordinary is what lies on their surfaces. Each pillar is a canvas, and the sculptors of the Neolithic covered them with an astonishing array of carvings. These are not abstract patterns or simple decorations. They are representations of the natural world, rendered with a skill and attention to detail that rivals the art of later civilizations. There are animals everywhere, foxes with bushy tails and alert ears, snakes coiling around the edges of pillars, birds, their wings spread in flight, wild boars, their tusks curved and menacing, gazelles, delicate and graceful, spiders, scorpions, and insects, their segmented bodies carved with anatomical precision, and most hauntingly, predators, lions with bared teeth, and vultures, their hooked beaks forever open. These carvings are not merely decorative, they are messages, though we can only guess at their meaning. Some scholars believe they represent totems, symbols of different clans or tribes who gathered at Göbekli Tepe. Others suggest they are mythological figures, characters in stories that were told and retold around the fires of the Neolithic. Still others see them as protective spirits, guardians placed on the pillars to ward off evil or to guide the souls of the dead. One detail is particularly striking. Some of the central pillars have carvings that suggest they are meant to represent human figures. Though they lack faces, they have arms carved in low relief along their sides, positioned as if the pillar itself is a body. On some, you can see hands with long fingers, and even belts, complete with carved buckles and decorative elements. These pillars are not just monuments. They are figures, perhaps gods or ancestors, standing eternal watch over the sacred space. But there is another mystery, one that has puzzled archaeologists since the first excavations began. Each of these magnificent stone circles, after being used for decades or perhaps centuries, was deliberately buried, not abandoned, not left to collapse and decay, buried. Someone, for reasons we cannot yet understand, made the decision to fill in the enclosures. They brought in tons of earth and rubble, packing it carefully around the pillars until they were completely covered. The temples vanished beneath the ground, entombed like pharaohs, hidden from the sky they once reached toward. And then, on top of the buried circles, they built new ones. This pattern repeats across the site. The oldest, deepest circles are the most impressive, with the largest pillars and the most elaborate carvings. As time went on, the circles became smaller, the pillars less grand, as if the original vision was fading, or perhaps transforming into something else. Why bury something you spent generations building? Some archaeologists believe it was a ritual necessity, a way of closing a temple once its sacred purpose had been fulfilled, much like the way some cultures bury their dead with ceremony and care. Others think it may have been a response to changing beliefs, a way of putting the old gods to rest when new ones took their place. Still others suggest it was practical, a way of preserving the stones from erosion or destruction, ensuring they would last until a future generation might uncover them. Whatever the reason, the act of burial had an unintended consequence. It preserved Göbekli Tepe almost perfectly. Protected from the wind, the rain, and the passage of time, the pillars and their carvings survived in remarkable condition, waiting beneath the earth for 11,000 years until Klaus Schmidt arrived with his brushes and his questions. The stone circles of Göbekli Tepe are more than architecture. They are expressions of the human soul at the dawn of civilization, monuments to the belief that some things are worth the impossible effort, that beauty and meaning can be carved into stone, and that the sacred deserves a space that reaches toward the heavens. Chapter 5. The Carvings, the Language of Stone. If Göbekli Tepe is a book, then the carvings are its words. They speak to us across 11,000 years, telling stories in a language we have only begun to learn. These are not letters or hieroglyphs, not the orderly symbols of writing as we understand it. They are something older, something more primal, the visual language of myth, dream, and belief, carved into stone by hands that knew no other way to preserve their world. Walk among the pillars, and you are surrounded by a menagerie of the ancient world. The stone surfaces are alive with creatures, some familiar, some strange, all rendered with a precision and artistry that defies our expectations of what prehistoric people should have been capable of. The most common figures are animals, not domesticated sheep or cattle, for these did not yet exist in this time and place, but the wild beasts that filled the landscape of the Neolithic Near East. Gazelles leap across the stone, their legs extended in mid-stride, their horns swept back in graceful curves. Wild boars charge forward, their tusks sharp and their bodies bristling with carved fur. Aurochs, the massive wild ancestors of modern cattle, stand broad-shouldered and powerful, their horns curved like crescent moons. But it is the predators that dominate. Foxes appear again and again, their bodies sleek, their tails bushy, their faces alert with an almost mischievous intelligence. In many cultures, the fox is a trickster, a boundary crosser, a creature that exists between the human world and the wild. Why the builders of Göbekli Tepe chose to carve them so frequently remains one of the site's enduring mysteries. Snakes coil around the edges of pillars, their bodies forming sinuous patterns that draw the eye downward. In some carvings, the serpents are so lifelike you can count the scales. The snake, of course, is one of humanity's oldest symbols, associated with death and rebirth, with wisdom and danger, with the earth itself. Birds are everywhere. Some are shown in flight, wings spread wide, soaring across the stone sky. Others are perched, watching. The most striking are the vultures, massive raptors with hooked beaks and powerful talons. In one famous carving, a vulture clutches what appears to be a human head, a grim image that has led some scholars to speculate about ancient burial practices and beliefs about the journey of the soul after death. And then there are the creatures that seem almost fantastical. Scorpions, their segmented tails curved and ready to strike. Spiders, with long, delicate legs. Insects of various kinds, rendered with such detail that entomologists can identify the species. These are not the animals we typically associate with power or majesty, yet they appear alongside lions and boars as if they were equally important. What does it all mean? The honest answer is that we do not know. We can make guesses, educated speculations based on what we understand about other ancient cultures, but the truth is that the symbolic language of Göbekli Tepe died with its creators. We are looking at a text without a translation key, a story told in images whose context has been lost. But we can make some observations. First, the absence of human figures is striking. In most ancient art, humans are central. We love to depict ourselves, to tell stories of our heroes and gods in recognizable form. But at Göbekli Tepe, humans are almost entirely absent from the carvings. There are a few exceptions, abstract figures, some possibly showing dancers or shamans, and the suggestion of human forms on the central pillars themselves, with their carved arms and hands. But faces are rare, and full human bodies almost non-existent. Instead, the focus is on animals. This suggests a worldview in which humans were not yet the masters of creation, but participants in a world dominated by other forces. The animals were not lesser beings to be hunted and consumed without thought. They were powerful, dangerous, and worthy of respect. They were, perhaps, gods in their own right, or the messengers of gods. Second, the emphasis on predators and venomous creatures is notable. These are not the friendly animals of a pastoral paradise. They are the things that could kill you. The lion, The snake, the scorpion, the vulture, these were the creatures that early humans feared and admired in equal measure. By carving them onto the sacred pillars, the builders of Göbekli Tepe may have been attempting to harness their power, to appease them, or to invoke their protection. Third, the sheer variety of species suggests a deep knowledge of the natural world. The people who carved these images were keen observers of animal behavior and anatomy. They knew how a gazelle moves, how a fox hunts, how a vulture perches. This was not abstract symbolism divorced from reality. It was art rooted in lived experience, in the daily encounter with the wild. Some of the most intriguing carvings are the ones that seem to tell stories. On one pillar, a scene appears to show a procession of animals moving in a line, as if in migration or ritual. On another, predators and prey are positioned near each other, suggesting a narrative of the hunt or the balance of nature. These are not random collections of images, they are compositions arranged with purpose and meaning. And then there are the symbols that are not animals at all. Scattered among the carvings are abstract shapes, crescents, circles, H-forms, and other geometric patterns. Some scholars believe these may be early astronomical symbols, representations of the sun, the moon, or constellations. Others think they could be clan marks or territorial symbols. Still others see them as purely decorative elements, the Neolithic equivalent of ornamentation. One particularly fascinating theory suggests that Göbekli Tepe may have functioned as a kind of astronomical observatory. The alignment of some of the pillars corresponds to the rising and setting points of certain stars and constellations as they would have appeared in the night sky 11,000 years ago. If this is true, then the carvings may be a kind of star map, a way of recording celestial events and their connection to the rhythms of life on Earth. But perhaps the most profound aspect of the carvings is simply that they exist at all. In a world without writing, without paper, without any way to record information except through oral tradition and memory, the people of Göbekli Tepe found a way to create something permanent. They took the stories that mattered to them, the beliefs that shaped their lives, and they carved them into stone. They made their myths immortal, and in doing so, they left us a gift. Not a clear explanation, not a history we can read like a book, but something more mysterious and more powerful. A window into the mind of early humanity, a glimpse of what mattered to them, what they feared and what they honored. The carvings of Göbekli Tepe are the first pages of human storytelling, written not with words, but with the language of image and symbol. They are a reminder that long before we learn to write, we learn to dream, and to make those dreams last forever in stone. Chapter 6. The Purpose. Why did they build? Why? It is the simplest question, and the most difficult to answer. Why would people who had no permanent homes, no cities, no written language, and no agriculture invest decades of labor into carving and raising massive stone pillars? Why gather hundreds of people from scattered bands to build something that served no obvious practical purpose? Why create monuments that would outlast their own lives by thousands of years? The answer lies somewhere in the realm of belief, but belief is a vast and complicated landscape. We can only stand at its edges and peer into the shadows, trying to understand what drove these ancient people to accomplish the impossible. Let us begin with what Göbekli Tepe is not. It is not a settlement. Despite extensive excavation, archaeologists have found no evidence of permanent habitation at the site. There are no houses, no storage facilities, no wells, no hearths for cooking daily meals. The absence is striking and deliberate. Whatever Göbekli Tepe was, people did not live there. They came, they stayed for a time, and then they left. It is not a fortress. The stone circles are not defensive structures. They have no walls designed to keep enemies out, no lookout towers, no strategic positioning that would make them useful in warfare. The location, on top of a hill, might seem defensive, but the hill is not particularly high or difficult to access. Anyone could have walked up it. It is not, at least primarily, a burial ground. While some human bones have been found at the site, they are fragmentary and scarce. nothing like the systematic burials you would expect from a cemetery. There are no tombs, no sarcophagi, no grave goods accompanying the dead into the afterlife. So what is it? The most widely accepted theory is that Göbekli Tepe was a temple, a sacred space dedicated to ritual and worship. But this raises an immediate problem. Temples, as we understand them, are built by civilizations with organized religion, with priests and hierarchies and codified beliefs. The people who built Göbekli Tepe had none of these things. Or did they? Perhaps we need to rethink what we mean by organized religion. The very existence of Göbekli Tepe suggests a level of religious organization that we did not think was possible for hunter-gatherers. Building the stone circles required coordination across multiple groups, a shared belief system strong enough to motivate cooperation, and some form of leadership to direct the work. There must have been individuals, perhaps shamans or spiritual leaders, who held authority not through force, but through their connection to the sacred. The animal carvings offer clues. In shamanic traditions around the world, animals are not just symbols but spirit guides, intermediaries between the human and divine realms. The fox, the snake, the vulture, each may have represented a different spiritual power, a different aspect of the cosmos that needed to be honored or appeased. Some scholars have suggested that Göbekli Tepe was a pilgrimage site, a place where different bands of hunter-gatherers would gather at specific times of the year for communal ceremonies. Imagine it, the summer solstice, or the harvest of wild grains, or the return of migrating herds. Groups would travel from across the region, converging on the sacred hill. They would bring offerings, share stories, perform rituals, and feast together. The feasting is important. The sheer quantity of animal bones found at the site tells us that massive communal meals took place here. These were not everyday dinners. They were celebrations, possibly accompanied by music, dancing, and the consumption of fermented beverages. We know that wild grains grew abundantly in the region, and it is entirely possible that the people of Göbekli Tepe discovered fermentation, creating early forms of beer or grain-based alcohol. In many cultures, altered states of consciousness are central to religious experience. Fasting, dancing, drumming, and the use of intoxicants can all lead to visions and spiritual encounters. Perhaps the rituals at Göbekli Tepe involve such practices. Perhaps the shamans who led these ceremonies entered trance states, communing with the animal spirits carved into the pillars, receiving guidance and prophecy. Another compelling theory focuses on astronomy. The careful alignment of some of the pillars and the presence of abstract symbols that may represent celestial bodies suggest that the builders of Göbekli Tepe were tracking the movements of the heavens. The night sky would have been vastly more visible to them than it is to us, unpolluted by artificial light. The stars were not distant points of scientific curiosity but living presences, gods or ancestors watching from above. If Göbekli Tepe was an astronomical observatory as well as a temple, it would make sense. The cycles of the moon, the movement of constellations, the rising and setting of particular stars, all of these could have been seen as divine messages, signs that told people when to hunt, when to gather, when to perform rituals. The temple would have been a place to watch the sky and to align human activity with cosmic rhythms. But perhaps the most radical theory is the simplest. Göbekli Tepe was built because humans need meaning. Even at the dawn of civilization, perhaps especially at the dawn of civilization, people sought to understand their place in the universe. They asked the eternal questions. Why are we here? What happens when we die? Are we alone? Or are there forces greater than ourselves watching over us? The stone circles were their answer. Not a philosophical treatise or a religious text, but a physical space where those questions could be asked and, in some way, answered. The pillars reached toward the sky because the builders wanted to reach toward something beyond themselves. The carvings depicted animals because those animals represented the mysteries of life and death. The act of building, of gathering hundreds of people to work together on something that served no practical purpose, was itself a form of worship. In building Göbekli Tepe, the ancient people were not just creating a temple, they were creating community, meaning, and identity. They were declaring that life was about more than survival. It was about connection, to each other, to the natural world, and to the divine. And perhaps, in the deepest sense, that is still why we build temples, churches, mosques, and cathedrals today. Not because we need them for shelter or defense, but because we need them for our souls. Göbekli Tepe is the earliest evidence we have of that uniquely human impulse, the desire to make the sacred visible and permanent. 11,600 years ago, a group of hunter-gatherers looked at a hill and saw not just rock and soil, but possibility. They saw a place where earth and heaven could meet, and they gave everything they had to make it real. Why did they build it? Because they were human, and that has always been enough. Chapter 7. The Burial, the Mystery of Entombment. There is something deeply unsettling about the fate of Göbekli Tepe. After centuries of use, after generations of people had carved the pillars and gathered in the stone circles, after all that effort and devotion, someone made a decision. A strange, inexplicable decision. They buried it. Not accidentally. Not as the result of a natural disaster or the slow decay of abandonment. They deliberately filled in the enclosures with earth and rubble, burying the pillars until they disappeared beneath the ground. They entombed their own temple. When archaeologists first discovered this, they could hardly believe it. The stone circles had not collapsed. They had not been destroyed by enemies or eroded by time. They had been carefully, methodically buried, as if someone were putting a loved one to rest. The evidence is clear. The fill material, the soil and stones that covered the pillars, was not deposited gradually by wind and rain over centuries. It was brought in intentionally, in large quantities, and packed around the structures. This would have required almost as much labor as building the circles in the first place. Hundreds of people would have been needed to quarry the rubble, transport it to the site, and fill in the spaces between the pillars. It must have taken years, perhaps decades, and when they were finished, the magnificent stone circles vanished. The pillars that had reached toward the sky were sealed beneath tons of earth. The carvings of foxes and serpents, vultures and lions were hidden in darkness. The sacred space where people had gathered for generations became a hill once more, anonymous and unremarkable. Why? This is one of the deepest mysteries of Göbekli Tepe, and scholars have proposed numerous theories, each attempting to make sense of this bizarre act. The first theory is religious transformation. Perhaps the beliefs that inspired the building of Göbekli Tepe changed over time. New gods replaced old ones. New rituals made the old temples obsolete. In many cultures, when religious practices shift, the old sacred places are not simply abandoned. They are decommissioned with ceremony and respect. Burying the temple would have been a way of honoring it while simultaneously closing that chapter of spiritual life. Think of it as a funeral for the gods. The pillars were not destroyed, which would have been an act of violence and disrespect. Instead, they were laid to rest, covered gently with earth, as if being tucked into bed. Perhaps the people believed that by burying the temple, they were returning it to the earth from which the stones had originally come, completing a sacred cycle. The second theory involves environmental or social change. Around the time that Göbekli Tepe was being buried, agriculture was beginning to take hold in the region. The wild hunter-gatherer way of life was slowly giving way to settled farming communities. The old pilgrimage site, built for nomadic bands, may have lost its relevance as people became more rooted to specific plots of land. But rather than simply forgetting it, they preserved it. By burying the circles, they ensured that the stones would not be looted, that the carvings would not be defaced, and that future generations might one day rediscover what their ancestors had built. In this interpretation, the burial was an act of protection, a time capsule created by people who understood that their world was changing and wanted to save something precious from the old ways. A third theory is more dramatic: ritual closure. In some traditions, sacred spaces have a life cycle. They are born, they serve their purpose, and then they must die. Just as a human body is buried after death, a temple might need to be entombed when its sacred time has ended. This could have been part of the religious belief system itself. a necessary step in the cosmic order. Imagine a ceremony, the final gathering at Göbekli Tepe. The people come one last time, bringing baskets of earth and stone. They perform rituals, perhaps making offerings to the spirits of the place, thanking them for generations of protection and guidance. And then, together, they begin to cover the pillars. It is sad, but it is right. The temple has fulfilled its purpose. Now it must rest. Some archaeologists have noted that the burial was not done all at once. The stone circles were buried in stages, over a long period of time. The oldest and deepest circles were filled in first, and then newer, smaller circles were built on top of them. This layering suggests a continuous tradition, a community that kept building and burying, creating and letting go over the course of many generations. It is almost as if Göbekli Tepe was designed to be temporary, or at least cyclical. Each generation built its circle, used it, and then buried it, leaving room for the next generation to begin again. In this way, the act of building was more important than the finished structure. The journey was more sacred than the destination. There is also a practical consideration that cannot be ignored. Burying the circles preserved them almost perfectly. Protected from wind, rain, and erosion, the pillars and their carvings survived for 11,000 years in remarkable condition. Whether this was intentional or simply a fortunate accident, the result is that we can see Göbekli Tepe today, much as it was when it was last used. Had the site been left exposed, the limestone would have weathered and crumbled. The carvings would have eroded into vague shapes. Within a few centuries, the pillars might have fallen or been broken up and reused for other building projects. By burying the temple, the ancient people inadvertently created a gift for the future, a message in stone that would wait patiently in the darkness for the right moment to be revealed. And so, 11,000 years later, when Klaus Schmidt stood on that hill and saw the first pillar emerging from the soil, he was receiving that message. The burial that seemed like an ending was actually a beginning, a promise kept across an impossible span of time. The mystery of why they buried Göbekli Tepe may never be fully solved. We can speculate, theorize, and compare it to other cultures, but the truth lies buried with the people who made that decision. What we can say is this: the act of burial was as meaningful and deliberate as the act of building. It was not abandonment. It was not destruction. It was something else, something deeply human, something that speaks to our need to honor the past even as we move into the future. Göbekli Tepe was not just built, it was buried, and in that burial it was preserved, waiting for a distant generation to uncover it and be astonished all over again. Chapter 8. The Revolution: How a Temple Created Civilization. For more than a century, the story of human civilization was written in a clear and logical sequence. It was a narrative that made sense, a staircase of progress, where each step followed naturally from the one before. First, the story went, humans learned to farm. They domesticated wild plants like wheat and barley, and animals like sheep and goats. Agriculture provided a reliable food supply, which meant people no longer needed to wander in search of game and wild plants. They could stay in one place. Second, permanent settlements emerged. Villages grew into towns, towns into cities. With settled life came new social structures: leaders and followers, craftsmen and farmers, rich and poor. Third, with surplus food and organized societies, humans had the time and resources to develop culture, art, religion, writing, law. Temples were built by civilizations that had already achieved a certain level of complexity. This was the Neolithic Revolution, the great transformation that marked the boundary between prehistory and history. Agriculture came first. Civilization followed. Göbekli Tepe shatters that sequence. Here, 11,600 years ago, hunter-gatherers built a monumental temple complex before they had agriculture, before they had permanent settlements, before they had any of the things we thought were necessary prerequisites for such an achievement. Göbekli Tepe suggests that we have been telling the story backwards. What if religion came first? This is the revolutionary idea that Göbekli Tepe forces us to consider. What if the need to gather, to worship, to build something sacred was the catalyst that eventually led to settled life and agriculture. What if civilization did not create temples, but temples created civilization? The evidence supports this radical reinterpretation. The region surrounding Göbekli Tepe is known as the Fertile Crescent, the area where agriculture first began. Within a few hundred miles of the temple site, archaeologists have identified the wild ancestors of domesticated wheat, barley, lentils, and peas. This is also where sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs were first domesticated. In other words, Göbekli Tepe sits at ground zero of the agricultural revolution. The timing is striking. Göbekli Tepe was built around 9600 B.C. The earliest evidence of domesticated crops in the region dates to around 9500 B.C. Just a century or two later. This is not a coincidence. Here is the theory. Building and maintaining Göbekli Tepe required large numbers of people to gather in one place for extended periods. Hunter-gatherers typically move in small, mobile bands because the local environment can only support a limited population. But if hundreds of people were coming together regularly to work on the temple, they would have quickly exhausted the wild food supply in the immediate area. The solution was to bring food to the workers, or better yet, to grow it nearby. Wild grains were abundant in the region. Someone, perhaps out of necessity, began to deliberately plant and harvest them, ensuring a more predictable food source. This was the beginning of agriculture, born not from a desire for convenience but from the need to feed the people who were building the temple. As agriculture became more reliable, it made sense for some people to stay near the temple permanently, tending the fields and preparing for the next gathering. Temporary camps became seasonal settlements. Seasonal settlements became permanent villages. And suddenly, humanity had crossed a threshold. We had stopped wandering and started staying. The implications are staggering. For decades, archaeologists believed that agriculture was the cause of civilization, the innovation that made everything else possible. But Göbekli Tepe suggests that the causal arrow points the other way. It was not farming that led to temples. It was temples that led to farming. Religion, in other words, was the midwife of civilization. This is not to say that religion was the only factor. Climate change, population pressure, and resource availability all played roles. But Göbekli Tepe demonstrates that belief, the need for communal ritual and shared meaning, was a powerful force in human development, perhaps even the most powerful force. Think about what this means. The great transformation of human society, the moment when we stopped being nomads and became builders of cities, did not begin with a technological innovation or an economic strategy. It began with an idea, a vision of something sacred that needed to be made real. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were not trying to create civilization. They were trying to honor their gods. But in the process of doing so, in gathering together, coordinating labor, sharing food, and passing knowledge from generation to generation, they created the social and technological foundation for everything that came after. This is the Göbekli Tepe revolution, and it rewrites the story of who we are and how we came to be. It tells us that humans are not just practical creatures, driven by survival and efficiency. We are dreamers and believers, capable of organizing our entire society around something that has no practical value, something intangible and invisible, the sacred. It tells us that our ancestors were not primitive or simple. They were visionaries who understood something profound about human nature, that we need more than food and shelter. We need meaning. We need community. We need to feel connected to something larger than ourselves. And it tells us that the roots of civilization are not found in fields of wheat or herds of sheep, but in the human heart, in the moment when someone looked up at the stars and felt the pull of the divine and said, "We must build something to honor this." Göbekli Tepe is not just the world's oldest temple. It is the birthplace of civilization itself, the place where humanity took its first steps from the world of survival into the world of meaning. And that changes everything we thought we knew about where we came from, and perhaps where we are going. Chapter 9. The mystery remains. Questions in the darkness. Stand at the edge of the excavation today, and look down into the carefully trenched earth. The stone pillars rise from the ground like ancient sentinels, their carved surfaces catching the afternoon light. The enclosures are partially revealed, their circular walls exposed to the sky for the first time in 11,000 years. It is breathtaking, humbling, and deeply mysterious. But here is the astonishing truth. You are looking at less than 5% of Göbekli Tepe. Beneath your feet, still buried under tons of earth and stone, lies the vast majority of the site. Ground-penetrating radar and geomagnetic surveys have revealed the presence of at least 16 additional stone circles, possibly as many as 20, all waiting in the darkness. The hill holds secrets that may not be uncovered for generations, perhaps centuries. And every secret revealed seems only to deepen the mystery. Klaus Schmidt, the archaeologist who dedicated his life to Göbekli Tepe, used to say that he would never see the end of the excavation. He was right. When he died unexpectedly in 2014, at the age of 61, he had barely scratched the surface of the site he had discovered. His colleagues continue his work, proceeding slowly and methodically, because Göbekli Tepe is too important to rush. Every stone must be documented, every layer of soil analyzed, every fragment preserved for future study. The excavation moves at the pace of patience itself, and so the questions accumulate, stacking up like the stones in the circles, each one a pillar of uncertainty, reaching toward understanding. Who was the first architect? Somewhere, lost in the mists of 11,000 years, was an individual with a vision. Perhaps a shaman, perhaps a chief, perhaps simply someone with the ability to see what others could not. This person convinced entire communities to commit to a project that would take generations to complete. They designed the layout of the circles, decided on the placement of the pillars, and chose which animals to carve into the stone. We will never know their name, never hear their voice, but their genius echoes through time. Who were they? What did they look like? What stories did they tell to inspire such devotion? What language did they speak? The people of Göbekli Tepe left no writing, no inscriptions, no phonetic clues. The language or languages they spoke vanished utterly, leaving not even a ghost. Were there multiple languages, different dialects, spoken by the various bands that gathered here? How did they communicate across linguistic barriers? Did they develop a shared vocabulary for the sacred, a pidgin language of ritual and ceremony? These questions have no answers, only the silence of deep time. What gods did they worship? The carvings give us clues, but not clarity. Were the animals themselves divine, or were they symbols of invisible powers? Was there a pantheon of gods, each associated with a different creature? Or was there a single, all-encompassing force that manifested in different forms? Did they believe in an afterlife, a world beyond this one where the spirits of the dead would journey? The pillars stand mute, keeping their theological secrets. What rituals took place here? We can imagine ceremonies, feasts, dances, and sacrifices, but imagination is not knowledge. What songs did they sing? What prayers did they offer? What movements did their bodies make as they honored the sacred? Were there initiations, where young people proved themselves worthy to join the work? Were there healings, marriages, or funerals conducted in the shadow of the pillars? The stones remember, but they do not speak. Why did it end? After more than 2,000 years of use, the tradition of building at Göbekli Tepe ceased. The last circles were buried, and no new ones were raised. The pilgrimage stopped. The site was abandoned. Why? Was it the rise of agriculture and settled life, which made the old nomadic gatherings obsolete? Was there a catastrophe, a drought, or plague that scattered the population? Or was it simply the natural death of a tradition, the way all human endeavors eventually fade? We do not know. And perhaps most frustratingly, what lies beneath? The deepest excavations have revealed the oldest and most impressive circles. But ground-penetrating radar shows anomalies even deeper, structures that may predate the earliest confirmed levels. Is it possible that there are even older monuments beneath the oldest ones we have found? Could Göbekli Tepe's history stretch back not 11,000 years, but 12,000 or more? Each answer spawns new questions. The work continues, slow and meticulous. New technologies are being employed: advanced dating techniques, three-dimensional scanning, DNA analysis of organic remains. Each tool brings new insights, but also new puzzles. The more we learn about Göbekli Tepe, the more we realize how little we truly understand. There is a kind of beauty in this uncertainty. In our modern world, we are accustomed to having answers at our fingertips, information available instantly, mysteries solved by algorithms and databases. But Göbekli Tepe resists easy explanation. It forces us to sit with not knowing, to accept that some questions may never be answered, at least not in our lifetimes. The archaeologists who work at the site speak of it with a mixture of excitement and humility. They know they are touching something profound, something that connects them directly to the dawn of human civilization. But they also know that they are visitors, temporary custodians of a mystery that belongs to all of humanity, across all of time. There is a phrase in archaeology: absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because we have not yet found something does not mean it does not exist. Perhaps somewhere in the unexcavated 95% of Göbekli Tepe lies a key, a discovery that will unlock the meaning of the entire site. Perhaps there is a carving we have not seen, a pattern we have not recognized, a context we have not understood. Or perhaps the mystery is the point. Perhaps Göbekli Tepe was always meant to be enigmatic, a question rather than an answer. The builders created something that would outlast them, that would speak across millennia, but they left no instruction manual, no explanation. They built in stone, and stone endures, but stone does not explain itself. Klaus Schmidt used to tell visitors that Göbekli Tepe would keep archaeologists busy for at least 50 years, probably longer. He was being conservative. At the current rate of excavation, with the care and precision required, it could take a century or more to fully uncover the site. And even then, even when every stone has been revealed and documented, the deepest questions may remain unanswered. Who were these people? What did they believe? Why did they build this place? And why did they bury it? The pillars stand in silence, carved with foxes and serpents, reaching toward a sky they have not seen in 11,000 years. They have waited this long. They can wait longer. And perhaps, in their patient silence, they are teaching us something important, that not every mystery needs to be solved, that some things are more powerful when they remain just beyond our grasp, shimmering at the edge of understanding. Göbekli Tepe is a gift from the deep past, but it is a gift wrapped in questions, and maybe that is exactly as it should be. Chapter 10. The Legacy: Echoes Across Time. On July 7th, 2018, Göbekli Tepe was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, officially recognized as a treasure belonging to all of humanity. The announcement was celebrated around the world, but for those who had studied the site, who had walked among its pillars and felt the weight of its age, the designation was simply an acknowledgement of what they had always known. This place matters, not just to archaeologists or historians, but to everyone who has ever wondered where we came from and what it means to be human. The legacy of Göbekli Tepe extends far beyond the windswept plateau in southern Turkey where it stands. It has fundamentally changed how we understand the story of civilization, rewriting textbooks and reshaping academic debates. But more than that, it has given us a new way of seeing our ancestors, and in seeing them, a new way of seeing ourselves. For too long, we imagined early humans as crude and simple, barely more than clever animals, driven entirely by the need to survive. We pictured them huddled in caves, grunting at each other, their lives defined by hunger and fear. The narrative was one of gradual, slow progress, from ignorance to enlightenment, from brutality to culture. Göbekli Tepe demolishes that narrative. The people who built this temple were not primitive. They were sophisticated, organized, and deeply thoughtful. They had complex social structures, advanced technical skills, and a rich spiritual life. They created art of stunning beauty and precision. They coordinated labor on a scale that would challenge even modern project managers. And they did all of this 11,600 years ago, with nothing but stone tools and human determination. They were us, fully, completely, recognizably human. They asked the same questions we ask. They looked up at the night sky and wondered what lay beyond. They experienced love and loss, joy and fear. They told stories around fires, passed knowledge from elders to children, and created rituals to mark the important moments of life. They understood that existence was about more than survival, that there were things worth sacrificing for, things invisible and intangible, but somehow more real than anything you could hold in your hand. They understood the sacred. This is the deepest lesson of Göbekli Tepe, that the need for meaning is not a luxury that arrives after basic needs are met. It is a basic need itself. We are not creatures who first eat, then sleep, then build, and finally, if there is time left over, contemplate the divine. We are creatures who will starve and suffer and sacrifice in order to create something beautiful, something that connects us to each other and to the cosmos. The temple did not come after civilization. The temple created civilization. This insight has implications that ripple outward in every direction. It changes how we think about religion, not as a system of control imposed by elites on the masses, but as a fundamental human drive, a creative force that brings people together and inspires cooperative action. It changes how we think about architecture, not as a purely practical endeavor, but as a way of making belief visible and permanent. It changes how we think about art, not as decoration, but as communication with the divine. And it changes how we think about ourselves, here in the 21st century, so far removed from the Neolithic world, yet somehow still connected to it. We still build temples, churches, mosques, synagogues, and shrines. We still gather in communal spaces to mark births and deaths, to celebrate and mourn, to connect with something larger than ourselves. We still look up at the stars and feel awe. We still carve our beliefs into lasting forms, whether in stone or pixels, because we need to make our inner world visible. Göbekli Tepe is a mirror held up to humanity across 11,000 years. And in that mirror, we see ourselves. Visit the site today, if you can. Walk among the excavated circles, stand before the pillars, and place your hand on stone carved by hands that have been dust for 100 centuries. Feel the heat of the sun on your face, the same sun that warmed the workers who raised these stones. Listen to the wind moving across the plateau, carrying with it the whispers of the past. Try to imagine it as it was. The circles intact, perhaps roofed with timber and hides. Fires burning in the center, sending smoke toward the stars. Hundreds of people gathered, their voices rising in song or chant. The smell of roasting meat, the sound of drums, the movement of bodies in ritual dance. The pillars standing like gods, watching, silent and eternal. And then imagine the moment of burial, when the last generation made the decision to cover it all, to return the sacred to the earth. Did they know that someday, impossibly far in the future, others would uncover it? Did they intend it as a message, a gift to descendants they would never meet? Or was it simply a goodbye, a final act of reverence? We will never know, but we have received the gift nonetheless. Göbekli Tepe teaches us humility. It reminds us that we are not the first to wrestle with the big questions, not the first to seek meaning in a vast and mysterious universe. Our ancestors, whom we so easily underestimate, were every bit as intelligent, creative, and spiritual as we are. They simply lived in a different time, with different tools and different challenges. It teaches us continuity. The line between the people who built Göbekli Tepe and the people reading these words is unbroken. We are their descendants, carrying forward the same hopes and fears, the same capacity for wonder and creation. When we build, we echo them. When we gather, we honor them. When we ask why, we join a conversation that has been going on for 11,000 years and will continue long after we are gone. And it teaches us possibility. If hunter-gatherers with stone tools could create something so magnificent, so enduring, what can we create? What impossible dreams can we make real? What will our descendants uncover 11,000 years from now? And what will it tell them about who we were and what we believed? Göbekli Tepe is not just a ruin. It is a beginning, the first chapter in the story of human civilization, the moment when we stopped merely surviving and started truly living. It is proof that we have always been more than the sum of our needs, that we have always reached for something beyond the horizon, something we could not see but knew was there. The stones stand, patient and eternal, waiting for the next generation to come and be amazed. They will wait as long as it takes, because that is what sacred things do. They endure. They remember. They bear witness to the astonishing fact that once, long ago, people who had almost nothing created something that would last forever. And in doing so, they showed us what it means to be human. Thank you for joining me tonight on this journey to the dawn of civilization, to a windswept hill in Turkey, where the story of humanity changed forever. Göbekli Tepe stands as a testament to the vision, courage, and faith of our ancestors, a reminder that we have always been builders of the impossible. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to History in Twilight. And if you ever find yourself in southeastern Turkey, stand before those ancient pillars and feel the connection across time. You are part of their story, and they are part of yours. Until our next journey into the past, I wish you a calm and peaceful night.